the Dallas Cowboys. This is a fun division to talk about. A lot of talent on the Cowboys as well. I do see some big overall philosophical changes happening in Dallas this year, just based on the coach speak, based on the coaching hires. So there's definitely a lot to dive into as we transition to the Jeremiah's favorite over here, our Dallas Cowboys. So let's talk about what I expect from the Dallas Cowboys in 2023. How do I expect things to change around this offense? Why do I expect those things to change? As I was just alluding to before hitting the banner, there's going to be some big philosophical changes based on the coaching hires at offensive coordinator, chiefly Brian Schottenheimer, and just Mike McCarthy's comments saying, I want to run the damn ball. I want to rest my defense, firing Kellen Moore for scoring too many points, throwing it too often, and leaving his defense not able to catch their breath apparently enough for Mike McCarthy's likings. So as you can see here, I definitely see a big drop in overall pass attempts for the Dallas Cowboys at a much closer to 50-50 run to pass ratio. And that's largely because of those comments I just alluded to, but also Schottenheimer. He's never been higher than 13th in the league in pass attempts. Every other year than that, in 12 years of calling plays, he's been outside the top 15 in pass attempts. Meanwhile, in his last 10 years calling plays, 4 of those teams were top 3 in rushing attempts. 3 of those teams were actually number 1 in rushing offense as well. He's only had 1 year above the 17th in pass attempts. So I do not expect this to remain a very pass happy attack. Now, McCarthy consistently was above 60% or higher pass rate throughout the Dallas time so far in his tenure, but definitely in Green Bay, he was around 65% pass rate. So this would be a big departure from McCarthy, but he has continued to hint at, I want to run more, I want to run more, I want to run more. And he hired the perfect coordinator to just hammer the run in Brian Schottenheimer. So again, 565 pass, 509 rush attempts, 53 pass, 47 rush. I think that is a nice, fair balance between this offense and what they want to do this season. That'll obviously mean great things for Tony Pollard, but let's first cover what I expect for this passing game. Definitely a lesser pie for Dak Prescott. Still think he can do some decent damage with this one. 374 completions on 554 attempts for 4,200 yards, 27 touchdowns. I think that's a fair estimate. Maybe he gets up to 30 touchdowns. It's where he's been hovering, 3 of his last 4 years despite getting hurt. So I definitely think history could be on his side, and maybe he does crack that. He has the good weaponry. It's just a matter of volume. Are they going to throw it enough for him to get there? Thankfully, Schottenheimer, for all his faults, he did like to get cute in the red zone. You think about Russell Wilson, always around 4,000 yards, but around 30 to 35 touchdowns, given he did like to throw it when they got in deep. So I tried to stat that out and bumped up, CeeDee Lamb's touchdown total. He usually is around 6.5 to 7% receiving touchdowns. I bumped that up a little bit. He also, Brian Schottenheimer, again, the volume's usually down, but he does attack defenses very well off the play action, get the receivers deep, even if you wish you would cook it more with the pass games. What he does run in the pass game usually has had solid success with Lockett, with DK having some quality seasons under his watch. But this is going to be a pretty crowded target distribution, in my opinion. So I'll show you real quick where I shaped it out. 22% of the looks going to CeeDee Lamb, and that's a big number of looks. But if this pie really does shrink as I expected to under Schottenheimer, that only equates to about 124 targets. For a guy that saw over 170 last year at 27% share, that would be a big drop. But I also think Michael Gallup getting healthy, calling himself springy again, feeling like his real self, I think that's going to be a big buck. Remember, this team chose to go with Gallup over Amari Cooper. I think they're going to be definitely proven wrong in that decision, but nonetheless, they really do hold Michael Gallup in very high regard. He never really seemed like himself last year, and all the talk from Dak, from the coaching staff, and Gallup himself is he's really bouncing back and looking like his fast, springy self. So I think an 18% target share, 102 targets. When he was the number 3 receiver, that's typically what he was around, and I think him and Cooks, it'll be debatable which one's really the 2 here. I do like Cooks better personally myself as a player and just for overall fantasy production this year. So I gave him a slight bump up, 107 targets versus 102 for Gallup, but they're going to be neck and neck. And the reason I don't have a ton of those guys is I do see them kind of nibbling at each other's cheese throughout the season. I also don't have a ton of CeeDee Lamb, despite this being a pretty solid projection. You can see with those 124 targets, 84 catches, and right around 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns, a little bit of a downgrade from last year's stats, a couple more touchdowns for him. just where he's going right now, ahead of Devontae Adams, for example, right around Amon-Ra St. Brown, even Garrett Wilson. I just have those guys a little bit higher, given I just think if this pass attack does not shrink under Schottenheimer and they throw it as much as they've been doing the last few years under Kellen Moore, then I think CeeDee Lamb warrants that position right alongside those guys. But to me, with more mouths to feed in a lower volume attack, I just don't get a ton of CeeDee Lamb at his price tag right now. And really, any of these weapons, as much as I like all of them as a unit and think they could be a pretty dangerous passing attack, even on a low volume passing attack, I just don't really buy into them at their price tags. There's always somebody, Cooks going around, for example, Jahan Dotson or some other guys we'll talk about in a little bit when we get to the Commanders. That doesn't leave a ton, though, with most of these targets dominated by that great trio of wide receivers. I do still think about 10% target share for Tony Pollard. He was at 11% last year, had over 60 targets. I think that's right around where we see him again. Deuce Vaughn maybe getting a little bit of a receiving role as their fourth round rookie, but he might not see anything. I don't think there's much outside of these receivers. Jalen Turbert or whoever ends up being. Noah Brown's gone at this point. So I really think it's going to be the big three, about 10% slice going to Pollard. And then the tight end position has been heavily featured by Mike McCarthy these last few years. Maybe that's because of Dalton Schultz, a very reliable guy, had that great rapport with Dak Prescott, but I don't think Schultz was overly special as a player. So if Ferguson, with all glowing reviews so far this OTAs, 14% share, right around 80 targets, 58 catches, 609 yards, and 4 touchdowns, I could see that being fair. And I do like him as a last round stab at your tight end position. Every single season, we see a top 5 guy emerge from the last rounds or undrafted at the fantasy tight end positions. Happened for 3 straight years. It was Dalton Schultz just a couple seasons ago. So I wouldn't be shocked if Ferguson ends up doing that as well. But I think he would need this offense to remain pass happier. And I expect that to be reined in. So that's how I see the passing game. Again, nobody I get totally excited about, even though I think very solid production down the line. Just nobody at their price tags I really love. Who do I love at his price tag, though? Tony mother effing Pollard. I am in love with this guy. He has been an absolute machine in games without Zeke. So I project him quite aggressively. But man, I don't see much reason not to. One, as the overall offense becomes more run heavy, more overall work for the backs. And are you really going to take much away from Tony Pollard for Malik Davis, who's rumored to be the clear-cut number 2 so far? And Camp Deuce Vaughn's 5'6". That's not a guy that's eaten into the work too hard. Maybe Zeke does emerge back here. They've talked about that being a possibility, and the fact that he's still lingering out there, I could see him returning, but it definitely would not be at this point. The fact that they've had all this time to sign him and they haven't. If he does return, I don't think it's going to be a Zeke that's a 55-45 type of split. I still think Pollard would still see a very, very healthy portion of this role, and it would just kind of eat into the Malik Davis totals that you're seeing right here, maybe with a slight. Pollard might go to 250 and Zeke might go to 190 type of carries, a little bit meeting, but I still think Pollard would get a ton of work, more than he's ever seen. He's never crossed 200 carries before in his career, but I do think this is going to absolutely be the season that happens. His career high is 193 carries, which he had last year, right around 40% of the rushing workload. So now as the lead guy, I could definitely see that spiking from 250 to 280 where I have him right now. Whether he can hold up or not for that, we'll find out. He is a smallish back, but I really do get prime Jamal Charles type of vibes from him, given how efficient, shifty, dangerous as a receiver. That's how I get. I really feel that highly about Pollard, and I love Jamal Charles, one of my favorite players of all time. The fact that when we've seen Jamal Charles is a very similar career narrative in that when he was used, he was always a monster. It was just a matter of, he's always in a time split while he was with the Chiefs for a while. And then when Andy Reid came in and there was no more Larry Johnson or no more of these other guys there, and they finally gave him the keys, he was not only stayed healthy, he somehow maintained his efficiency and was an absolute juggernaut. Now, we've only got 3 instances of Pollard being that lead back and really and seeing what he can do in that situation. In the 3 starts he's had without Zeke Elliott, he averages 28.9 PPR points per game. He's on pace for 1,700 yards on the ground, 521 yards through the air on 91 targets, nearly 60 catches. So big spike in receiving work when he's not sharing that with Zeke at all. Big spike in total touchdowns, on pace. He had 2 touchdowns a game when Zeke was out. I don't think he would do that. Maybe 34 touchdowns on the year. That's not happening. But again, When you total all those 48 carries, 315 yards, and 6 touchdowns, plus another 92 through the air in the 3 games without Zeke in his career, that's damn solid. And I expect this to be even a more run heavy attack this season. So, yes, these Pollard projections might seem nuts, but they're actually below the pace that he's on in the games without Zeke Elliott so far throughout his career. So 280 carries, maintaining that above 5 yards a pop, which he's been throughout his career. And again, anytime he's had 20 plus carries in a game, he still maintains. In fact, he's gotten better as the game has gone on. So 10 touchdowns, an elite touchdown score. That's what he had last year. And now with Zeke out there, that could even be conservative. I could see that being, though, where they get Malik Davis involved as a goal line hammer. A little bit of a bigger guy, so maybe 4 touchdowns mixed in there for Malik Davis, but some quality receiving usage. You've seen the highlights of Tony Pollard running a wheel and catching an 80-yard bomb. Like, he can run any of the routes, so I do think a quality receiving profile at 340 and 3 touchdowns, very reasonable, finishing the year at around 1,800 total yards, 13 touchdowns, 40 receptions. And again, that seems like a lot, but I really think that's a pretty quality, like, not floor, but not even the ceiling. Like you said, 28 points a game without Zeke in his career. And it's giving me those Jamal Charles vibes that, like, yeah, Jamal Charles, 28 points per game as a starter, but are never really going to get a start, never going to maintain that when he finally does get to start. And then bam, he does and continues to be a monster. I could see that similar narrative for Tony Pollard. So big fan of him in this run heavier scheme without Zeke Elliott. I think it's just an absolute smash play. He's going in round 2 right now, middle to late round 2. It's a no-brainer. Top 5 running back for me, and an easy smash at his price tag right now.
What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.